Okay, well, thank you again, everyone. Thank you for being with us. It is absolutely a beautiful sunshiny day here in South Carolina. The wind was blowing earlier this morning, and it is a little cool, so we were gas logs going. But it's just absolutely gorgeous to look out the window and just see how beautiful the nature is, the trees and the sun. It's just awe-inspiring. And what we want to talk about today, I just want to kind of follow on a little bit last week about just understanding how precious we are, what our relationship with God is. I want to raise the rhetorical question of what would you do if you knew you couldn't fail? What would you do if you knew you couldn't fail? Think about a dream, or a dream that you have, a desire that you have, something that you really would like to do. And perhaps you haven't begun yet. Perhaps you're just still in the dream stage, which is fine. It's a very important stage. It's the beginning stage. But what would you do if you absolutely knew that you could not fail? What is it that you would do? And then the follow-on question is well, what's stopping you? What's stopping you from doing that? And I don't mean that in a laying on guilt sort of way. I mean that in a revealing way. What's stopping you from doing your heart's desire, from pursuing it, from going out and just being whatever it is that you wish to be? Dr. Holmes tells us in the very beginning of the Science of Mind textbook, he tells us if we would just stop and think about how magnificent this life is, just this incredible thing called life that we take for granted. We take every breath for granted. We take the fact that we eat our food and somehow there's an intelligence in our body that knows how to take what it needs and eliminate the rest. And we don't even think about it. Usually we don't even think about it as we're eating. We don't even think about it as we're breathing. We don't think about the miracle that there is in a glass of cool, fresh water and how it sustains life. And how the water is in itself two gases that have combined to make a liquid. And it's just amazing. And we live in this incredible universe. You look at the photographs on the internet of from the Hubble telescope of deep space, and you see how populated the area out there is, and that area is billions of light years across. And you can see the different stars out there, and if you look closer, some of those stars are actually galaxies, clusters of millions of stars, but they're so far away they look like one tiny little dot to us. And it's just amazing. And here we are in this fantastic universe where this consciousness that we call God, the divine, this power, has been able to bring all of this into formation, into existence, and allowed everything to evolve perfectly to get to the place where life on earth could support a being, us, capable of holding the consciousness to discover it, to discover our relationship with it, to sense that we are part of something so much bigger. So Dr. Holmes tells us here we are in this fantastic universe, which is much grander than we can ever imagine. There are more stars in the heaven than we can count. There are more grains of sand in the handful of the beach than we can count. And yet we find ourselves weak, tired, and afraid. And he says, why is this? And then goes on to tell us that the science of mind deals with this very question. Why is this? Alan Cohn, in his book, Joy is My Compass, related a story that creates a great picture. And the pictures stay with us long after the words are gone. That's why the parables were so important in teaching, and that's why ancient teachers used them. Remember, when Jesus was speaking, a lot of the people he spoke to could not read nor write. So they couldn't take notes, but they could remember the picture, they could remember the story, and they would get the moral of the story, and they would be able to carry that with them. So Alan Cohn gave us a beautiful one about a time he was invited to go horseback riding, and he lived in Hawaii. And when he showed up at the appointed place and time, he said in a story he wasn't really crazy about horseback riding in the first place, but he wanted to humor his friends and to go along and to to have some fun with them. But when he showed up where they were supposed to meet, he found out that it was a trail ride, and they were going to take the horses on a trail up the side of a volcano. And he said now, here it was, he wasn't crazy about horses in the first place, but now he was going up a narrow trail on the side of a volcano, and he was terrified of heights. But he didn't say anything. He wanted to be polite to his friends, didn't want to upset the day. So he went along, and he said that as the horse lumbered up the trail, as the horses followed one another up this trail, that he was just terrified. He was petrified. His heart was beating. He could feel it in his throat. He was sweating. He was breathing got shallow. Excuse me. And he was just having a really tough time, like going into a panic attack. He said finally they got up to a clearing up on the side of the mountain, or up near the top of the mountain, where they stopped. And you could look out there and you could see the Pacific, you could see the white caps, you could see for miles. And he wasn't enjoying it because he was so frightened. So the guide kind of asked everybody if they enjoyed the ride up, and the people said yes. And he says, well, that's good. He says, we're going to take the steep way down. And Cohn said he started to really, really panic. They were going to, if what they came up wasn't the steep way, he didn't want to see what was ahead of them. But again, he didn't say anything. He just kind of held on for dear life. And as they were descending the mountain, the animal's body was swaying back and forth underneath him as the horse placed its footing on the narrow trail. And Alan could look off to the side, and he could see that just a few feet over to the side, there was nothing there. You would just roll down the steep side of this volcano. And if you fell, or the horse fell and he fell, he would just be rolling forever, and he knew he would die. And he really, really started to get frightened. And then he stopped. He stopped himself in the middle of his attack. And he said, what would you be experiencing if you knew the horse you were riding would not fall down? And he started to think about how beautiful it was. What an absolutely gorgeous view there was. The sea breeze was coming in, the waves were dancing in the sunlight, the leaves on the trees were all moving, the animals were swaying, there was a certain rhythm and a certain harmony to what was going on. And he was able to relax. He was able to let go of his fear. And he was able to enjoy what he had been missing because his fear had overcome him. And this is kind of the same thing that Dr. Holmes is telling us, which is, we have all of this beauty around us. We have this magnificence around us. We have the omnipotence, the power of the universe is all around us. And we're missing it. We're missing the beauty. We're missing the joy. Because we're afraid. Because we're afraid. And why are we afraid? Why are human beings timid and weak? And the answer to that is because we do not recognize, we do not know at a deep level, we do not truly believe, or trust, perhaps is the right word, that we are part of all of this. We think that somehow we are separate from it, different from it. In many cases, we think that we are a victim of it. If you ascribe to the materialist view of life, that all of life is nothing more than a chemical accident in the universe, then life itself is indeed cruel because it allowed us to evolve consciousness to a point where we would become aware of who we are, we would become aware of our own mortality, and there would be nothing after that. and we would live every day in the fear and the dread of oblivion. But life is so much more. Life is so much more than that, than us being a victim of us being a chemical accident, if we can just take time to realize it, just take time to know it. So all of our spiritual growth then is in trying to reunite with that power, reunite with that wisdom, reunite with that love that has created us out of itself and has sent us here to have this experience so that we might develop our unique personality. It has left us alone to make the discovery of who and what we are, and in so doing form a unique personality. As Dr. Holmes tells us, it would not be possible for God to create us fully enlightened and have us to be different, that we would all be the same. So by this sort of emptying ourselves out of the knowledge of the union, as I said last week, the garden experience, this emptying ourselves out of that experience, forgetting it, and then going forth into the experience of the appearances of good and the appearances of evil. As we do that, we start to create our unique personality, our unique worldview. And it is through that unique personality and that unique worldview that the divine finds a unique starting place for its own creative process. It creates anew through us. It experiences the world anew through us. You know, if you have children and seen them play, you know, it's like we discover the world anew through their eyes. You know, things that we have long since forgotten. Their little eyes pick up, their little hands pick up, and they're just absolutely amazed by it. Just the simplest thing. A piece of paper becomes an airplane, or it becomes a fan, or it becomes a painting. The creativity is there, and they're just discovering anew. And yet our relationship with the divine is even more intimate than a parent's relationship with a child, because it is the divine living its life through us and as us. And we do not live our children's lives. We observe them, but we do not live them. So the divine has created us out of itself and left us alone to make the discovery that we are really part of it. And all of our spiritual growth then is our progress along that path, our progress of closing that gap, the gap that exists only in consciousness, of us somehow being apart or different than or separate from God. From God. So in that line of reasoning, in that line of thinking, we then ask ourselves, well, what do the desires, what role do desires play in our spiritual growth? And what role do our fears play in our spiritual growth? And what would God be afraid of if God were truly here as us? Would God be afraid of anything? And if not, then why am I afraid of anything? So let's talk first about desires, because the term desire has been misinterpreted, I believe, reinterpreted perhaps many different ways. You know, you've probably heard in some spiritual groups people say desire means, of the Father, de being of and sire being the Father. Something that comes to us from the Father, from Spirit, from God. But in other cases we're told that desires are really the cause of our suffering, and that desires are something that we should be without. We should strive to be desireless, so to speak, because desires cause problems. And they do. There is absolutely no doubt that they do. But I think what we have to do is we have to we have to consider what we mean by desires, and are all desires kind of dangerous, if you will, or desires that can lead to pain and suffering? Because as a philosopher, I was taking a class with a philosopher one time, and he asked the rhetorical question. He said, if you think that desires are bad, and you want to be without desires, then you have a desire to be without desires. And if you shouldn't have any desires, then you shouldn't have the desire to be without desires, then should you? And of course he let us go off and think about that for a week or so. Never did give us his version of the answer either. But it was an impressive point. You see, there tends to be desires that are, if you will, self-serving desires or selfish desires, desires of greed, desires of lust, those sorts of things where everything and everyone around us is just a commodity to be used for our own purpose, for our own pleasure or enjoyment or gain, our personal gain, so to speak. You know, the movie Wall Street, you know, with Michael Douglas, for example, shows you, an example of that, where the character standing up and saying, greed is good, telling people that greed is good. So we have desires that we definitely know from experience that they're not for the highest good of all. But then there are desires that harm no one, you see. There are desires that give a greater expression to life. There are desires that actually bring us closer in experience to God. So Dr. Holmes told us, he said, if you desire something, ask yourself some questions. Is this thing I desire, or does this thing that I desire give a greater expression to life, to love, to truth, or to beauty? And hopefully it should answer yes to at least one of those. And then ask yourself, does this thing I desire rob from anyone in any way, or does it harm another in any way? And the answer to both of those should be no. So if this thing that we desire, if this dream that we desire to experience is something that gives a greater expression to life itself, and it takes nothing away or harms no other person, then Dr. Holmes says it's good. Go for it. Then the entire universe supports you in your pursuit of this desire. And the reason for that, I believe, is that the divine love leads us by placing desires in our heart, so to speak, by letting us become aware of desires. We all must eat to live. And yet what guides us to eat, what tells us to eat, is the desire we know as appetite. And we all must drink water to live. And what is it that guides us to take drink but thirst, a desire? So we have these appetites, these desires that are built into us that cause us to engage in an activity that is good for us. Now, I believe it was Augustine or Aquinas, one of the two, who said, we would not even have the desire to pray if God had not first placed it in our heart. And that is an acknowledgement that the divine has provided within us the desires, the good desires, or the rightful desires, if you want to call them that, the desire to engage in those activities that are going to be good for our growth, our spiritual growth. The desires that are going to lead us back home, as something leads the animals on their migration over thousands of miles, in some cases to a place that they've never been before. They'll find their way. A new generation is born along the migratory route, but the new generation picks up where the old one left off and continues the journey. What guides them on their way? And just as that guidance is there for the animals, the guidance is within our heart to lead us into a greater experience of God. So I invite you to consider then that this dream that I'm talking about, what is the dream? What would you do if you knew you couldn't fail? What is your heart calling you to do? What is that? That it is a desire that is there because you are ready to know God more intimately through this process. Right? Not necessarily the completion. I want you to think about that for just a moment, because one of the fears that we have as human beings is, well, suppose I start and I don't finish. Suppose I start that project and I never finish it. Well, then what? I'll have wasted all my time by investing time into something that is left undone. And that is the human way of looking at it, but it is not the spiritual way of looking at it. Because maybe you just need to engage in it long enough to do what you needed to do for your spiritual growth. Maybe it was never about completing the project, but it was about beginning the project because there was some way that you had to grow to begin. There was some way that you had to grow to move forward. And once you grew in that appropriate manner, then you no longer needed that dream. You no longer needed that desire. It's like eating. You eat until you're full, and most of us eat well beyond that point. But the idea is that at some point while we're eating, the desire to eat, the hunger goes away. It's satiated. And we stop eating until the next time. But at that point, we stop eating. Now, there may be plenty more food on the table. There may be food left on our plate, but we're full. See, we're full. And at that point, we need to stop eating. When we try to eat beyond the point of being full, we cause ourselves health problems. So here's the way that I believe it works. Here's what I'd like you to consider. Is that which is keeping us from our complete and our full experience of the divine is mostly our fears and our inappropriate desires, our selfish desires, so to speak. So in the story of Adam and Eve in the garden, when they were, in the mythology, when they were cast out of the garden, there were two cherubim who stood there at the gates, and they guarded the gates of Eden so that the humans could not get back in. And those two cherubim represent our fears and our ego. Those are the two things that are keeping us from getting back into the garden. And in the Buddhist tradition, you'll see carvings of the Buddha in repose, in meditation, seated, with his legs crossed in the triangle pose, the lotus position, in deep meditation, and he has his hand out, holding it up like a crossing guard might hold up her hand to stop traffic, kind of the halt sign. And the Buddha is kind of back inside a cave, and at the mouth of the cave are these two scary, ugly creatures. And if we want to go in and be with the Buddha in repose, or if we want to get back in the Garden of Eden, we have to pass through these two things that are keeping us out. And again, they are our fears and our ego. So it seems to me to make perfectly good sense that when we become aware of a desire, and that desire passes the test of being for the higher good, of harming no one, when we have a desire that we want to move forward to, it is only natural to me that desire is there to cause us to move through a fear. Because it is a fear that is keeping us back from our experience of God. So the divine, as it would give us the desire to pray, to come to know it, gives us a desire to do something, or allows us to become aware of a desire to do something, because in so doing that, We have to overcome a fear that has been keeping us from knowing God more intimately, just in some way. Maybe, for example, whatever it is we want to do, in order to do it, we have to learn to speak in public, but we're terrified of speaking in public. And why are we terrified of speaking in public? Well, we think everybody's judging us, and everybody is going to criticize us, and everybody is going to laugh at us. And our ego is involved. Our ego would be bruised. And in order to learn how to stand up and speak in public, we have to move through all those fears. We have to learn that everybody in the audience is a person just like us. Even if they did laugh, that would be a reflection of them, not of us. And what is it about the ego that would feel bruised? Do we not know who we are? Are we not grounded in our identity in the divine? So all of these kind of things come into play, you see. And in order for us to start to move forward, then we have to move through those things that have been holding us back. And that's why I say once we move through those fears, we may be finished. Maybe we thought the project that we were going to do was a 10-year project, but in order to get started, we had to learn how to speak in public. And then once we do that, then things change and we never come to finish that project. And that's okay. Because spiritually we've done what we needed to do. We have brought ourselves to a place where we have moved through those particular fears and those particular doubts and those ego issues that were holding us back. So I want you to consider then, what would you do if you couldn't fail, if you knew you couldn't fail? Because if you begin, and if you start to move towards that dream, and if you recognize that all of the power in the universe is with you, all of the love of the universe is with you, all of the intelligence of God is right where you are, and it is immutable, nothing can stop it. And if you reframe, if you will, the goals into saying, not material goals about what I'm going to do or how much I'm going to make or those things, but the spiritual goals of what am I going to let go of? What am I going to let go of along the way? How am I going to grow spiritually along the way? Can I trust in God along the way? And that is kind of the key, because in order for us to move forward, we have to learn how to trust. We have to learn how to trust that beautiful, beautiful intelligence and that wonderful life that has created us out of itself did not abandon us. Dr. Bales tells us so beautifully in his book, Your Mind Can Heal You. You know, if you think of the miracle of a sperm and an egg uniting and then dividing, and each cell knows exactly where to go and what to do, and some become eyes and some become bones, and some become kidneys and some become hearts and some become fingers and toes, and it is just a miraculous process that is guided by an infinite wisdom. And if you think about it, you can almost feel the love of God present in that moment, preparing everything perfectly along the way. At the right moment, the baby will come. While it is in the womb, it is breathing fluid because that makes the lungs stronger. But while it is in the process of passing through the birth canal, the little body is squeezed tightly and all of the fluid is pushed out of the lungs, so that when it comes into this world, its chest expands and it takes its first breath, guided by the love that created it, breathing in the air that was here before it was even born. The sunlight that reaches us today, the photons of sunlight that reach us today, began their journey from the center of the sun millions of years ago. They bounced around inside the sun for millions of years, and finally they escaped the surface of the sun, and it only took 8 minutes after that to cross the 93 million miles across the solar system until they reach us. But the sunrise that you saw today was created over 1 million years ago. The love of God knows how to provide for itself as you and for I. And we must trust, and we must trust. So when we feel that we ought to do a thing and we find ourselves to be afraid to do it, we should say, well, that's good. That's good. The reason that I felt I ought to do it was so that I could surface this fear, that I could move through this fear, that I could ask myself, what would it be like if I knew that I couldn't fail? What would it be like if this fear wasn't here? And rather than trying to wrestle with and struggle with the fear head on and trying to figure out where the fear comes and why am I afraid of this and all of the things that psychology and psychiatry tell us to do, we simply turn our mind away from the fear and we turn it to trust in God. Emmett Fox says, turn your eyes entirely away from the problem and let them rest on God. So we turn our eyes to God and we start to ask ourselves then, do I believe and do I trust in the omnipotence of the universe? Do I believe and do I trust in the omniscience of the universe? Do I believe the omnipresence is in fact present right here? Can I move forward in spite of the fear? Can I tell it, as Dr. Holmes says, tell it, get behind me, Satan. Where did you come from? Who is your mother? Who is your father? You are nothing but a lie pretending to be the truth. Because the very love of God is right here where I am, moving me forward, moving me past this, moving me into a greater experience and expression of God. So I ask, what would you do if you knew you couldn't fail? What would you do if you knew you must succeed? You couldn't help but succeed. Because there's something in our hearts that is calling us forward. There's something in our heart that the divine is calling us to become aware of, to do, as a means of seducing us into moving past those fears, moving past the two cherubim that are standing there trying to keep us out of the garden. And of course we put those cherubim there, we leave them there, and only we can take them away. So the journey is a glorious journey then of discovering the divine and discovering what it is and singing and dancing and enjoying life along the way and of having fun along the way. And we must stop judging these things in the human context of, well, how much did you make? Did you finish? Did you get your book published and was it a bestseller? Did you finish your movie and win the Academy Award? See, none of those things can be counted as spiritual coin. Did I follow my heart? Did I diminish my fears? Did I come to know God in a greater degree because I listened to the desires within my heart? The desires to give a greater expression to life or to love or to truth or to beauty. The ones that don't harm or take anything away from anyone. I want to share with you something that I saw yesterday. Again, I hope to leave you with a picture that's worth 1,000 words, because it is still with me, and it will be with me, I think, forever. It was just so precious. I had an opportunity yesterday to go down to the local roller skating rink. The grandchildren go roller skating on Saturday afternoon, and I get to go down and watch them and help them if they need some assistance. But of course, a lot of the time you're just sitting there at the table watching out on the floor and watching all of the other children, and it's just amazing kind of the mixture of ability that's out there. Some of the little ones are just hanging onto the wall. You know, you've seen them kind of going around the wall when they go 2 or 3 steps and fall down. And others are zooming like they've got a jetpack strapped to their back and weaving in and out and spinning around and turning corners on a dime, and just amazing. And in the midst of this sea, the sea of kids, I think every kid in Rock Hill, South Carolina was there. There was this little one who couldn't have been more than 4 years old. And she was just as precious as she could be. And she had her little skates on, and she really couldn't skate. She couldn't roll, but she was picking her feet up kind of like high stepping, you know, kind of lift the foot up, move it forward, and put it straight down, you know. And she had learned how to walk in these skates. And she was right out there in the middle of the floor. She wasn't hugging the wall. She wasn't trying to hold on to people. She was right out there in the middle of the floor all by herself. And she was just going around, you know, in her little step fashion way. And they play music for the kids while the kids are skating. And one of them was a kind of a silly dance that they would do. You know, pick your left foot up and shake it, pick your right foot up and shake it, stomp 2 times, and do all this kind of stuff. And all the kids that go there, they know this song. So when this song comes on, they're all going around and doing this big dance. It looks like something from the end of Xanadu. They're all just skating around and doing this dance. And here's this little one who can barely stand up on these skates, and she's doing it. She's absolutely doing it. She's got her little hands up in the air. She's got her little feet going. And they say, pick your foot up and shake it. And she'd pick her foot up, and she'd fall down on the floor. But while she's sitting on the floor, she's still shaking that foot. She is totally unfazed by the fact that she just fell down. Doesn't bother her a bit. She is still doing the dance, even though she's sitting on the floor. And one time she plopped down like that, and one of the kids right behind her just reached down and grabbed her, scooped down under the armpits and picked her up. And while they're holding this little one up in the air, her little feet are still going. She's still dancing. Her feet aren't even on the floor. She didn't even turn around to see who picked her up. She's just into the music, and she's got this little dance going. And she just went around. She was just absolutely having a ball, just absolutely expressing herself joyfully, and paying no attention to what anybody else thought. No attention to whether she was as good as anybody else, or whether she was better than anybody else, or whether she was faster or slower. She was just out there, just having a blast, all at her own pace, you know. And it reminds me of the little meme that goes around on the internet, you know. Dance like no one's looking, or if they are, you don't really care. Just go dance your dance. Just go live your life. Just go have a blast. And here's this little one just following her heart. All she wanted to do was to be out there and dance. And she was out there dancing. And it didn't matter whether she fell down or she got up. It didn't matter whether somebody was carrying her or she was on her own 2 feet. She was going to have the time of her life. So I invite you this week, take that picture with you this week. Take that picture of that little child who seemed to be totally ignorant of the fact that this may not work out exactly the way she thought it would. She just seemed to not care about that at all. It just didn't bother her a bit that she might fall down. If she did, she'd get up. If she didn't get up, somebody'd pick her up. None of that mattered because she was out there having fun. So let's go through life this week and let's find something that you really have wanted to do for a long time. And maybe you've avoided getting started for different fears, for different human ways of judging it. And let's get the human ways of judging it out of the way. And let's realize that the desire is in your heart because it is a desire to know God in some particular way. And that the desire in your heart is going to lead you through whatever you need to pass through. It is going to dissolve into the nothingness, the lies pretending to be the truth. That the omnipotence and the omniscience of the universe is right where you are, and it is immutable. That nothing can stop you now. Nothing can stop you from accomplishing the spiritual purpose of this desire. which is to come to know and to love God more fully. We are each that beautiful little child. We are each here to express, to enjoy, to dance as if no one's looking, or if they are, we don't really care. We are here to go out and to express life as only we can, as our own unique, individualized expression of God. But we have to get started. We have to awaken to the desire. We have to recognize it as good. And we have to begin. So I invite you this Sunday, let this be the day that you begin. Search your heart, find something you want to do, and go do it. And so it is.